let's see if our live stream is good.
The red light is
Okay. Oh, there. Okay, it's started. Yeah, there it is. It's good. Yay! Okay,
All right,
good.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Oh, and if anybody needs a parking validation, you can get them from her at the desk later, or just ask me and I'll get you one if you were in the garage. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started here. Okay, I'll pull my thingy up here.
This is working. Got inflection.
Where do I have that up? Of course it goes vanishing on me. 1 second.
I can't see Kevin because he's a vampire.
There we go. A little bit of a lag is all.
Ah, there we are. Okay. So anyway, all right. Welcome everyone to the latest installment of the EFF Austin monthly meetup. See old and new faces, welcome all, and to those of you watching online, welcome. My name is Kevin Welch. I'm the current president of the board at EFF Austin. For those of you who are like, what is EFF Austin? Well, we're Austin-based, as you might guess, but we're a long-standing local digital celebrities organization. Been around over 30 years at this point. We collaborate closely with Electronic Frontier Foundation, based out of San Francisco. They are the nation's oldest and largest digital celebrities advocacy group. You can kind of think of them as the ACLU for the internet. They work to protect your rights in emerging technological spaces, especially your First Amendment rights to free speech and your Fourth Amendment rights, which implicitly grants you a right to privacy. They protect all sorts of awesome things that let the internet and technology empower you to have a good future and have your rights respected. They fight for things like net neutrality, end-to-end encryption, protecting Section 230 of the CDA, which is how social media can exist, and just do a lot of good stuff. They're awesome. You should get involved, give them money. If you're not based in Austin, there are many groups all around the country who work with them. In fact, there's a thing called the EFA, or the Electronic Frontier Alliance, which is about 100 digital celebrities groups who all work in a form of kind of peer-to-peer activism with the EFF. None of us have any formal legal affiliation. We just all kind of believe in the same values. EFF usually focuses on the national level, while the various groups focus at city and state levels. EFF Austin is proud to be the oldest member of the EFA. I think the second oldest is EF Georgia from '96, I believe. We're the oldest, and actually we're, as far as I know, still to this point, we're not only the only one in Austin, we're the only one in Texas. So we have a lot of ground to cover, and I can promise you there's many silly laws our lawmakers pass that we've tried to encourage them to do better on. We, most recently on that front, actually, with the last legislative session, we gave some feedback on HB4, which was the big Texas data privacy law. We basically, it wasn't so much a case of that we thought it was bad because it was better than the status quo, which was nothing, but we didn't think it went far enough, basically. So I gave some testimony on thoughts on how they could improve the bill. They ignored it, but we tried. We are proud of our success recently at the city level, where we were arguing with the city about returning automated license plate readers without sufficient protections or oversight. While we weren't able to entirely kill the program, which would have been our preferred outcome. Oh. Wow. Yeah, I mean, clearly if there's a more fun party going on in there, you know, go check that out. But I am happy to say while we weren't able to kill the program, which would have been our desired outcome, we were very happy to basically win getting it. They wanted to keep the data from the license plate readers for a full 30 days. We got them down to 7 days, so we were very happy about that. You know, small steps. But the main thing we do primarily is educational at the moment. We have our monthly meetups, which are the second Tuesday of every month at 7 p.m. They've been going on here at Capitol Factory for over 10 years at this point, before my time. John, who's here, can tell you when they actually started. But we've been here a long time, very grateful to Capitol Factory. We've had a bunch of really incredible speakers on a bunch of topics over the years. Because, you know, we think you know, if our lawmakers can't understand a lot of this tech stuff to make wise laws, well, we got to educate everybody because everybody elects the lawmakers. So that's how we try to do our part. So yeah, we're entirely community run. So get involved if you're passionate about these topics. We've also been known to occasionally throw very fun cyberpunk parties when I can convince eccentric millionaires to do it. If you know any, please connect us. It's been a bit since we had one. But yeah, so that's a little bit about us. I guess I will quickly, yes,
I
John?
don't have to be eccentric.
Oh, no, that's true. They can be, and they can completely politically disagree with us, you know, if they want to give us money, as long as there's no strings attached. Anyway, let's see. So normally I try to give you all a little preview of some of the things we have coming up over the next couple months before I turn things over to our speakers. So next month, we're going to be having a virtual speaker. We're going to be beaming in Dave Moss, who's one of EFF's main investigative journalists and reporters. He's specifically going to be talking to us about an issue that very much affects Texas. You may not even know about this because it has not really made the news a lot, but it turns out that down just across the border in Mexico, in Juarez, the Mexican government has built a 20-story tall giant surveillance tower that can potentially intercept communications as much as up to 100 miles away from the border with this tower. No warrants, of course. So Dave's going to be talking to us about what he's found about this tower, so we can at least all maybe go yell about how the hell this happened. Also, February, I'm very happy that we're going to be hearing from Antonina Smidlova, I believe that's how you say her name, but she's a tech lawyer, and specifically she's going to be talking to us. She's done a lot of academic research about basically how surveillance works in Moscow, basically. So we're going to be hearing from her about how that all goes down. So yeah, those are the next couple talks we have coming up. Should be a lot of fun. I recommend attending them. If you know anybody who'd like to give a talk, by all means, let us know. The rest of the calendar is open. We're also in the early stages of planning an event in March that actually won't be part of South by Southwest. It'll happen after South by Southwest, but there's going to actually be some European members of Parliament being brought by a DC think tank to Austin. We're trying to put together a community event with them to talk to them about tech policy and how they could improve EU legislation, which if you follow it, the EU gets half their tech legislation way better than the US, and the other half they get way worse. It's both very inspiring and very frustrating simultaneously. Yeah, so that's some of the stuff we have coming up. I also encourage you all to stick around after the talk. We usually go get a drink in the hotel bar here, which will probably also double as this year's holiday party because I've been on the job market and didn't have the bandwidth to put something more formal together. So yeah, by the way, if you need a full stack web dev, I'm great and I'm available. So without further ado, I think, so first of all, I'm going to give our speaker's bio here, but I'm also going to let our friend and speaker and just general cybersecurity person here, Owen McNally, wants to say a few words about Peter as well. So I will say my little thing, turn things over to him, and he'll turn things over to Peter. So yeah, so you know, I often feel very honored that we've had some pretty illustrious, famous people speak with us over the years. Obviously, we've featured Cory Doctorow and Bruce Sterling at some of our events. We recently featured Bruce Schneier, the famous security researcher. We've had a lot of pretty illustrious people over the years. And having to say we're continuing that trend, I'm very honored that our speaker this month is Peter Wang. For those who aren't in data science machine learning, Peter is a pretty big figure. He's the founder and CEO of Anaconda, which is one of the biggest data science platforms. They're up there with Fast.ai, and like, you know who they are if you work in this space. He's also a founder of the PyData open source data science movement. He's been a longtime advocate for open source software, starting with founding the Linux users group at Cornell in 1994, so OG Linux. It's like Fedora or something. In recent years, he's been active in the internet privacy and decentralization movement, having given many talks at DWeb Camp and serving on the board of the Center for Humane Technology. With the accelerated adoption of machine learning and AI systems, Peter's actively working on ensuring that the technology foundations of the future remain open to innovation and are oriented towards human thriving. So basically we asked Peter to just come and, as a literal expert on machine learning and AI, give us some of his thoughts about how this is going to impact digital celebrities, the good, the bad, and just where he sees this all going. Though before he speaks, I'm going to quickly let Owen say a few words, since they are friends, and I know he asked me to say a few words.
Yeah, so I just, Peter, thank you so much for doing this. We've been trying to get this together for months. We finally were able to coordinate around everybody's schedules. I just wanted to say that of the people in Austin that I have met, I don't know that anyone has made me rethink computing and the idea that we were really fundamentally leaving the era of computing that we all grew up in, that we're leaving this behind. I've just, it's remarkable how challenging and how radical your interpretation of our situation is. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you for coming.
Well, thank you very much. That's a lot of, I mean, put me up there with like Bruce Schneier and Cory Doctorow and others is quite a compliment. I'm deeply humbled by that. And I hope I don't disappoint these very lofty expectations that have been set for me and for those who are joining us off the interwebs. One question, just as a procedural matter, is there a way to dim this row of lights just so there's a little more contrast?
Those.
Or all of them so you guys fall asleep?
Well,
And then, I mean, whichever, I'm good.
let me ask Emily, or do we have that there? Is that brand new? Yes, there we go.
There we go. Okay, and now,
Protect me, but we can figure it.
all right, a hush settles over the crowd. So, yeah, I am the co-founder and the CEO of Anaconda, and oh my God, where's my cursor go? And I realize this is a very interesting crowd that I'm very, very excited to speak to. I'm going to touch on a few things which might get a little spicy, and hopefully that will engender some good conversations and questions afterwards. So I think, and to Owen's point, I think we're at a moment that is really, really important right now in computing, and I think many people here, in particular in the EFF adjacent circles, remember the promise, the kind of abundant utopic sort of promises of computing and what it could do for everyone, and then it certainly did not quite go that way. And all of us, of course, have a great deal of disappointment, shame, and anger about this, and I think we might have a chance to fix it all, or not, so we're going to figure that out. But the point of this talk, so again, I'm wearing this for those who came in late. I'm wearing this because I actually have a day job, which is to be the CEO of a venture-backed company and do all those things at, kind of board, investor, and senior executive meetings today. But in my heart is a kid with a Slackware shirt, 1995, plugging into 100 megabit, full duplex 100 megabit Ethernet at Cornell, banging on Linux for the first time. So that's, we sort of build in layers, right? So there's I won't say I was ever cyberpunk, but I was always just really into computers and what it could do for people, what it could do for me. So we're going to talk about that today, and I would just tee this up this way. There's two major scarcities that the last 50 years have been about, right? And this is a weird way of looking at it to some extent, because if you look at the PC revolution, and when you look at the PC revolution, you're like, oh my God, PCs, bicycles for the mind, or whatever. And it's like, actually, no. Turns out coding is kind of annoying and hard, and it requires a certain kind of cognition, which is systems, abstract, procedural abstraction, a kind of thinking that the vast majority of humans don't do naturally. So there was a scarcity of talent who could actually write code, and that is true of computers. And those of you who remember the old computer ads where they were on the kitchen counter and the wife in the apron was going to type up a basic program to catalog her recipes, you remember that bullshit, right? That didn't happen. And so that's because this stuff is hard, okay? 40, poke, 49, 168, 0. That is hard. And that's literally the most basic version of programming. The other scarcity is the internet revolution, and what it did was it created this unfortunate thing of bandwidth, the bandwidth scarcity around that, and the latency is high relative to the information of the space. You guys can do this. Bandwidth is scarce relative to the information space of what we want to query. Okay, this is a weird way to talk about the internet, because it was like, oh my God, telecommunications, fibers under the ocean, everyone can talk to everyone, everyone can access the blah, 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 and all this other happy horse shit. No, actually, what ends up happening is we realize how much we don't know, and how badly we want to get to all the possibility spaces, and humans are not good at interfacing the scarcity solvers in our brain, and the min-maxing optimization pattern matching in our brain is not good when it actually hits like 3 orders of magnitude greater abundance than it was designed to solve for, hence diabetes. Even when we hit sugar, we don't know what to do with that. This we don't know what to do with. And so these are weird ways of looking at the last 50 years. That computers means that, you can do a lot of like interesting computation, but coding is hard. Internet means you can access all sorts of stuff and talk to all sorts of people and do all this crap. But actually, the bandwidth is scarce compared to how much stuff you could get to, and Google, as the DNS in the sky for everything, they make a lot of money, basically, right? 40 billion a quarter, because they are the gateway to that. And now what's interesting about this, the reason I bring these two up as scarcities, is because this ability to turn what the LLMs and the recent kind of AI innovations have shown is that we're basically eliminating that first scarcity, because you can go from sketch to working prototype. It's not perfect, it's whatever. But the fact that it effing works at all is shocking, right? And here is a 40 billion parameter LLM on a USB drive. So you don't need to go and raise $10 billion from Satya to basically have a little bit of fun. And now the bandwidth scarcity between you and all of the things you could want to do with a lot of human information is eliminated. And so this is why I'm presenting this slide. Oh my God. No, please don't. Yeah, okay. It is a corporate machine. I'm doing deeply on corporate things, but this is a corporate machine. So that's why I present it like this. And I think it's important to view this current moment in time in AI in the context of eliminating these two scarcities. And holy crap, what does that mean, right? And what I mean is this, and I know you all can read, but if you just think for a second, just close your eyes and just think for a second, everyone you know who knows how to code, everyone you know who works in tech, who you say is technical, everyone who knows how to configure a router, plug in something into something else, everyone who can go and write a line of SQL, everyone who can actually write a more complex Excel expression into the formula bar. Everybody that we could say is technical in the sense of what a room full of EFF people would call technical, that's 4% of the global population. The other 96% get to eat what we dish out to them. And we make sure we get first dibs. We get the good jobs. We get all of the alpha and the growth in Wall Street. All of that comes through the productivity gains that we give to the world, right? And the global IT industry, just as an estimate, is about $5 trillion, right? Good chunk of the human international GDP. But the problem is that the other 96% of people, not the problem, but the good news is the other 96% of people have a lot of good ideas, a lot of creativity. They're humans too. They can't write code for shit, but they're really, really cool people. And with AI, we can actually unleash all of that creative potential and all of that genius and all of that everything, right? So if we do that, can you imagine, right? Just do the math, 4%, if you go and you increase the number of things that could be done with computers by a factor of, God, I don't even know what, 25, whatever it is. It's just incredible to think about that. So this is what is about to happen. And people talk about GPU shortages. We're going to have computer shortages. Once anybody says, oh, you know what, I can do my glass sculpture better with AI, because it's going to give me all these crazy cool things. I can go and do my art better. I can go and optimize some other stuff better. I just need to buy a stack of 10 MacBook Pros. Whatever it might be, we are going to use computers a lot more. That's the bet. And the other thing is, if you think about what this 4% of people have done as a extractive mechanism to, well, not extractive, that's too harsh. The way we have structured, the way that the economic flows have structured the technology landscape is specialization into software components, architectures. Are you a software guy? Are you a hardware guy? Are you in cybersecurity? Are you in data science? What language do you use? What database systems do you deploy in the cloud? Are you on-prem? All of these divisions that we put into the technology space, they're all a pile of parts. And anybody who's on the buy side of technology, if any of you are CTOs or if any of you work at a small firm or a big firm and you're trying to piece together a solution to build something, you're pulling a lot of parts together. It's like going to an AutoZone about the state of Michigan, and then trying to pull the parts together to build yourself a car. That's really annoying. It takes a lot of expertise. But we now have 3D printers, right? If every, Bill and Jane can go and 3D print a Ferrari, that complexity goes away. So this is really the interesting thing, the moment in time that we're at. And so if we see what the new world is that's about to happen, and we as a group of people are passionate and we care about certain human values in light of computing and whatnot, then it's important, I think, for us to not fail the way that we have failed over the last 30 years to stop the freight train of all the terrible shit, right? And the way we have to do that is we have to articulate North Stars. And I'm going to give some examples that might be controversial, might be a little spicy, but I will also then talk about what I think maybe we should think about for AI. And I do think, and again, I've not been like part of big activist networks or whatever, but I certainly have been in the middle of tech, watching big platforms happen, watching the internet capture happen, watching all these things happen to what were to really a landscape that was created by open protocols and open collaboration. So for instance, decentralization, one example of how we articulate North Stars versus not, right? So if we talk about decentralization, I've been in the DWeb movement for a number of years. I'm passionate about this, so this is not a criticism of the ideals. It's a criticism of the narrative approach to market that we've taken on this, right? And so I had actually given a talk a few years back at DWeb Camp, and I said, look, we should stop using the word decentralization because it's this like trying to disrupt the status quo, but it doesn't give us like what happens after that. And so now people will say peer-to-peer and things like that, which is fine. But it also suggests a topological fix to what I think is not a topological problem. And also the most important thing is that the current big megacorps will absolutely be the best at decentralization. They'll make sure that your edge and fog devices or whatever you want to call them are going to be decentralized and they're going to report right back to the central machines, right, when they have the chance to. So the topology isn't the issue. And if we say decentralization, we're sort of saying the problem is you have a hub and spoke model. So we get rid of the hub, then somehow we solve everything. We don't at all, right? Instead, what I was arguing at the time was that the North Star approach is say what we actually want is orthogonality, of separation of concerns between really key dimensions, the dimension of data, the dimension of transport, and the dimension of identity. And in fact, almost everything bad about trillion-dollar companies centralizing everything and everyone renting identities from providers that have backdoors to everybody. The bad thing about that is that someone who wins one part of the stack wins all the rest of it too. It's the collapsing of a three-dimensional space of possibilities into a one-dimensional monopoly, duopoly sort of stack. So this is a different way of framing the discussion. As opposed to decentralization, we talk about orthogonality. And I'm not, the point of the talk isn't to dive into this part. I could spend an hour just talking about this. Hopefully this intrigues some of you.
You can come back and talk about everything you're saying.
Would be happy to. But I think some of the concepts here are not foreign to people here. And as a bunch of nerds and geeks, the idea of orthogonality hopefully expresses a lot, right? And this is an example of how we talk to a North Star versus being a reaction to what's broken. Next is, of course, everyone's favorite topic, privacy, right? And it's and this is where it gets a little spicy. I remember distinctly in like '93, I was chatting with the sysops for my BBS. I was not actively dialed into the internet from home at the time. I could only get to it from the local university, but I was pretty active in the BBS scene. And so we're going back and forth, and he was really big on PGP and all these kinds of things. And so I was trying to ask him at the time, I was like, why do you care about privacy? Wither privacy, right? And he had some things, and I'm like, yeah. And granted, I was 15 at the time. I didn't know any better. But I was like, but I'm not a criminal. What do I have to hide, right? So these kinds of things. And over the years, I've realized that I really have not heard, and again, I'm a physics guy who really wants to get the first principles. I feel like I haven't heard the really, really compelling philosophical argument for privacy that really moves me other than it's my right, or anonymity grants us some safety and some other kinds of things. And that's not to say that any of you don't have the answers. I'm just saying I haven't heard ones that I found super compelling. And then it's in the last 4 or 5 years where I really started working on decentralized web and what was broken with social media and all these kinds of things that I came to understand, what, the reason we need privacy is because it gives us the space to develop our identity. It gives us, so it's not a hiding place, it's a womb. We get the right to tell the social environment we're in who we are and what we are. And we have that agency in that. So a humane social space gives each individual the right and the agency, the sovereignty, to say how they want to show up. And all the super wealthy people in the world get to do this at any party. They can, assuming they're not super famous, they can choose to reveal as much or as little of themselves as they want to. They're not forced to walk around with a thing on the forehead saying, I am this person, son of this Rockefeller, worth 2 point whatever billion dollars. They can just be whoever they want to be, right? And that ability to show up, to have the right to determine how you show up somewhere, that is an important part of the human experience. That's a deeply human sort of thing. And this is completely independent of the internet. This is just what a humane space is. And so when we go to the internet, which is certainly a substrate for human socialization, we need to carry this forward in that space. And I think this is, again, a concept of a North Star versus a reaction. Like, we're going to hide, sort of that SNL skit, you put your weed in it. It's like, oh, you got to hide it. It's not about hiding. It's about saying, I have a right to determine self-determination how I want to show up. And any social space that doesn't give me and everyone else that self-determination is not a humane space. So it's not about hiding, it's about a womb. And actually I have another talk on this as well, which talks about how the importance of letting dyads and triads and small groups of people form their own private communications is an important way to foster trust, to create sort of a different kind of connection versus everyone just being a mimetic Thunderdome yelling sound bites at each other. So this concept, again, is an example of a North Star that is a way for us to talk about this. So, here it is. Actually, I have the slide. Here's a slide, right? So the ability to surface local trust, right? All these kinds of things, that is completely lost when we have massive, billion user sort of social media platforms that are broadcast by default. Anyway, these are examples of North Star versus reaction. So then, how do we think about AI? What is the right sort of North Star way to think about what AI can mean for people? That's not just a reaction to, I don't want Microsoft to own all my thoughts. I don't want Google to sell me my waifu, right? Like, what is the actual thing? That was a joke, and no one laughed. I have a waifu. I'm very happy with her. As was mentioned, I've been doing open source for a while, I've been in the open source space for a while. And in the last 20 years, I've been very active in the Python community and really watching how the Python language got adopted by science and mathematics nerds and engineering nerds, and then we sort of turned that into a set of tools that were really good for numerical computing, and then taking that into data analysis, which then laid the groundwork for modern machine learning and AI. All of that journey has been really interesting, but at the same time, I was a consultant and then a founder of a company, and I also got to see how capital and how business, IT purchasing, IT spend, budgeting, how the entire enterprise software market works, all of these kinds of things, watching all that happen, again, as a physicist, I want to understand first principles. I want to understand the dynamics. I want to understand the constraints. What are the necessary things? It got me to really recognizing that there's a deep lie at the heart of a lot of this stuff. But first, I'll give everyone a little bit of a history lesson, which is that software as a thing, as a piece of intellectual property, is a very recent phenomenon. That concept, that mental construct in the game of the world, that software is something you could buy and sell, that you could trademark, that you could copyright, that you could do whatever, that is no older than me. Literally, I was born about the same time as the Copyright Act of 1976. Well, a little bit later, but not a lot later. And so this idea that a pile of code is property, Bill Gates' famous letter to hobbyists, don't steal my shit. Like, all of that is a very new concept. And what's interesting is so much money, fortunes and mansions and yachts have been made on the basis of this concept. We put a barrier up around the free exchange of software. We say this is a kind of idea that you have to then go and vend, or you can vend, and we put limitations around it. It certainly structures an economic landscape and has made many people rich. But there's a different take on this, right, which now we call open source, historically it's called free software. Whatever political flavor you choose, FSF versus OSI versus whatever, the point is when we actually allow this thing to run unfettered and to be given away, it becomes extremely, extremely valuable. It becomes, in fact, vastly more innovative, vastly better maintained, vastly more predictable, and vastly more accessible. So the fact that when you give this away, and the more you share it, the more valuable it becomes, and the more you partition it and fork it, the less valuable it becomes, this is, for me, proof that it's a new kind of a thing, and it is unproperty. There is not a single thing in the world that we can think of as unproperty. Physical objects are, by human metaphysical sort of understanding, like, it's just limited. If you have an apple, I can't have the apple. If you eat it, I can't go and then eat it again. Right? If you give me a horse you no longer have a horse. You don't get 2 horses when you give me a horse. But if I have an amazing piece of software and I keep it to myself, then I got to fix all the bugs, and some new algorithm comes out, I got to go implement it. If I give it to 10 different people, all of a sudden, holy shit, I'm way more powerful because now I'm leveraging the resonant thinking of 10 additional brains. So this idea that you have a thing that's not particle-like and atomic and corpuscular, but actually this wave, more like a wave resonance kind of thing, that is a deeply different kind of thing. And sometimes when I talk about this, I liken it to, how many people here have not seen Monsters, Inc.? Okay. Oh, damn. Okay, earmuffs then, if you don't want to spoil. But basically, they extract energy by scaring kids. And the kids' screams give them energy. And then at the end, spoiler alert, last chance earmuffs, okay. At the end, they discover that making kids laugh produces 10 times more energy, 100 times more energy, blows their energy meters up. This is the same thing. It's like, oh yeah, sure, this gets, Paul Allen, $200 billion or whatever it was, Bill Gates, hundreds of billions of dollars, Steve Ballmer, $100 billion, Larry Ellison, however much to ascend to godhood, whatever it is, this makes a lot of people a lot of money, but holy shit, this is what everything's actually built on. There's not a single thing you use today, not a single system, not a single anything that isn't built on a lot of open source. So this is a really, really interesting point, and I've gone at length about this because this is a really important thing to center on. It's almost like craziness. Can you imagine going to Sand Hill Road, telling all those VCs, hey, giving this stuff away actually produces way more value for humanity, right? So the other thing I came to realize in building and scaling the PyData ecosystem is that there's a conversation, there's a piece that's lost in this. When we just look at, when you say this is property, therefore it's valuable, it's an apple, it's an orchard, it's a horse, it's a whatever, goose that lays golden eggs, it becomes this boxed and bounded thing, and you also just put all the value in the artifact, in the code, like how good is this code? And you completely ignore the human that produced the artifact. You ignore and you sort of leave behind the people, you defocus off the people that make the thing, when actually the thing is just a residual from the human ideas and from the collaboration of the teams that produce it. And so when you actually watch an open source project evolve over time, as many of you I'm sure are involved in open source and have lived this kind of a journey, the quality of the code, the quality of the ideas, the maintainability of the project, all these things are actually intrinsically tied to the quality of the human ecology, the people, the teams that are producing it. So really, software is an artifact of a human ecology the way that honey is the artifact of a bunch of bees. And you can focus on the value and the deliciousness of honey, but can you imagine how insane it would be to have an entire world economy, $5 trillion of GDP, international GDP, built around honey, and nobody wants to talk about the fact that bees make the honey? That's insane, right? But this is the truth, that it's actually the amazing thing about software. And I did the first time I think I really publicly articulated this was on my interview with Lex Friedman. And I said, look, what's really hidden in people have a lot of discussions about the software's eating the world and the power of software and all this other shit. And it's basically what they lose is that software is even more powerful than that. Right? There was a point in time when I could fit all of the core SciPy and NumPy maintainers in a minivan, and the amount of daily economic value generated by their open source software is in the billions of dollars a day. So you have a minivan full of human biomass that can generate billions of dollars a day of economic value. Now, if you imagine going back to like King Louis of France and saying, I got a scythe and I got a farmer in a field outside of Paris, and if he works for one afternoon with his magic scythe, he harvests all of the wheat and grain you will need to feed the entire kingdom for the fucking year. What kind of leverage, what would you do? How many wars would you fight for that sickle, right? And it's like, actually, no, there's actually millions of those sickles. Everyone can have a sickle, just go nuts, right? So this idea that actually we can have unleashing incredible power if we actually allow the human ecology to do its thing and see that technology is of the creative human ecology and not a thing that's separate from it. So anyway, that then lays the baseline for, again, the theme here is, what is the North Star? What do we solve for? What are we pushing towards in this world of possible abundance from AI? Now think about the economics of it. And this is something I stole directly from Stratechery, from Ben Thompson. And it puts in perspective, I think, what this latest technology, LLMs and things, what they represent for humanity. And he has this beautiful articulation where he says, in the ancient days, there's this idea of propagation value chain, not ancient days, but there's this idea, this concept of a value chain for propagating ideas. You have a great idea, how do they get your idea, right? And all of these different steps are bottlenecks that we had to invent technology to scale or to get around. So writing unbundles consumption. I don't have to be around the campfire with you to hear what you had to say. I could read it a year, 2 years, 1,000 years later. And then when we got the printing press, we unbundled duplication. So you didn't have to have a scribe who was literate, translate and transcribe these things. We just stamp, stamp, stamp. You could turn mechanical energy into idea propagation and scale. But there's something here that we never really thought was the bottleneck. I mean, you put internet up here too, right? Internet unbundled and unblocked distribution at scale. But this idea of substantiation as a bottleneck was not something we'd even thought of as a bottleneck. What do you mean it's a bottleneck? Like, if you have an idea, of course you have to actually spit it out. You have to express it somehow. I'm a great artist. Well, yeah, show me your painting. Well, I haven't drawn it yet, right? I'm a great musician. Haven't actually played the music yet. This idea that substantiation is a bottleneck that could be removed, again with electricity, with mechanical means, that is stunning. That is truly stunning, and it's also just as a meta thing. Like, look at the right. The invention of writing, the invention of the printing press and the internet, LLMs. And even if they hallucinate, even if not perfect, it's still a stunning thing to be on this ladder, to be here, present, alive, and breathing when this moment flips for humanity. Now, that then really calls into question classic industrial era models of ownership and property. Right? In the same way that we didn't really think too hard about the implications of owning software and what that means to turn into property, if we start just arbitrarily throwing down lines of ownership, lines of control, defining this, that, and the other, then we're going to have a really, really freaking hard time figuring out who owns the upside. Right? Because it's one thing if you say, well, I got a machine, I have the means of production, I own the means of production, your labor that drives the machine, and we harvest some wheat, and I get this much and you get that much, and that's what it is. Okay, fine. But to say that, hey, I have the machine, you go up to it, and then takes your ideas and spits out all these ideas, and I own the machine and the upside on these, and you get this, right? We got to really think about what the implications are by putting industrial era ideas around the separation of property and labor and what that really means within our current economic system. It's very possible our current economic system is actually not rich enough to capture or to put in the right economic controls around these things. Because I do believe in markets, I believe there's value in economic exchange, peaceable economic exchange, but we may be trying to solve a 5-dimensional problem with 2-dimensional basis vectors, and that's going to be hard. This is just another thing here. The thing right now that you might be seeing in the news and in the press is that there's definitely legal uncertainty around LLMs, right? Because you have to compile a bunch of training data, and in some jurisdictions, the mere compilation of data into a collection of data makes that actually protected by not copyright, but by database rights. When you go and you apply some Python code to create a set of ones and zeros off of that, are those ones and zeros derivative works or not? There's a question being debated now. Because I know I can write some Python code that turns a pile of work into ones and zeros. That would definitely be considered derivative data, and that's if I just use the zip module from Python, I zip up a bunch of MP4s and MP3s, no one would argue that this thing is not a derivative work. But if I go and apply some PyTorch, vector training, blah, 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 at the end, is it derived work or not? That's a point of legal contention right now. So there's all this kind of stuff, and the really important thing to understand, kind of back to the point about expression and substantiation, LLMs are not copiers, they're not reproducers, so copyright is not even the right framework to be thinking about this, because they are idea extractors. We've never had the ability, it would be insane to think that we could extract ideas, like imagine a book of like Shakespeare, I'm gonna pensive style like Harry Potter's, like suck the ideas out of here. But we can now, that's insane that we can. So all of the things that we have, all the tools we have from a legal perspective that govern copying instantly cease to be relevant because this is not copying. This is uncopying. This is unprinting. This is uncamera, right? This is like the opposite of the expression process. This is essence extracting. And for an EFF crowd, I'll call back to John Perry Barlow's excellent Selling Wine Without Bottles essay, and he talks about essence, right? This is actually the ability, you have a little, like almost like a Star Trek style tricorder thing. It's an essence extractor out of any bottle of wine. Now you got a real big problem if your entire economy is built on wine and on bottles, and I can extract the best out of any bottle of Bordeaux or Chardonnay you've got with this essence extractor. And that's what these things are. And even after all of that, at the end of the day, it's not just about copyright. It's that if you can use these things, you can actually go and synthesize and produce the likeness of anyone, and deep fake them and do all these kinds of things, and terrible dark things you can imagine that people are doing right now. And this is there's a state level laws on the rights of publicity, but there's not a federal thing right now. And this is the important thing that's interesting, because California, of course, really sets the standard on this, because they have so many Hollywood actors and actresses who people go and steal their likenesses to sell like pancake mix or something. But this is now applying to literally everyone, right? Every parent of every young boy or girl is going to care a lot about this for all sorts of reasons. Because if you have a federal statute on creating the likeness of someone, that's a big step. And we may need that. So the point here is that until these legal things, and it's like database rights, not just copyright, it's database rights, it's right of publicity, unjust enrichment, all these kinds of things. Until that's resolved, every single company that's using these models, and some of them are like, oh, it's an open source model. Doesn't matter. I give you an open source machine gun, you can still go and kill a bunch of people, and you're still liable with it. So here, you can get an open source model with a bunch of training data that's got all sorts of terrible things in it, or copyrighted things. You're still liable if you start producing stuff with this, right? So there is a legal gray zone, and people are just YOLOing into it right now, but it is definitely not resolved at all in any jurisdiction, at all. So, you got Microsoft saying, oh, would you trust a nonprofit or a for-profit? This is when they were arguing, he was arguing against Facebook's open source model in favor of OpenAI's model, which is like 49% owned by Microsoft. So the mind boggles. This is prior to the OpenAI board fiasco, but it's just kind of hilarious. So Microsoft finally got the open source religion, I guess, or something. No, they got the nonprofit religion, not even open source. They got the nonprofit religion, because Facebook is a for-profit but released an open source model. Anyway, I have no words. I have no words. So this is actually my last slide, and this is really the point. I think that if we have such an amazing technology that can unlock the promise, the OG promise of computing for everyone, if we are not able to articulate the positive vision of what that could do, if all we do is react to all the bad stuff that the trillion-dollar entities and whatever are going to do to it, we're forever perpetually going to be stuck in the loop of being just outside. It's going to move faster, so have an OODA loop that moves faster. We're not going where the puck is going, we're basically trying to whiff at where the puck was. So I think that what I would encourage all of you to do, like you say, well, what can I do about this, right? I think the important thing here is, number one, recognize what the stakes are, recognize what the possibilities are, recognize the conversations we should be having about this, how big the stakes actually are. Don't play for peanuts. This is actually really, really big. Again, I say I was not one of these cypherpunk, CryptoPunk, whatever kind of people, but absolutely I was really, really into a lot of peer-to-peer technologies back in the day. And you think about the fact that we really could build, we really have the ability to build small portable computing that is a wisdom upgrade, a knowledge and information upgrade for literally everyone on the planet. We could build it for peanuts. We could really build them for peanuts. You think about how small a gumstick Linux box is, or a Raspberry Pi. You think about where people are going with like the quantized smaller models. You put on a 128 gig little mini micro SD card, and you could just build these things at scale and give them to, you don't have to give them to everybody, but you certainly give one to every family. And now you'd have an educational unit, you'd have something that you train it with just clean data. Like, oh, there's all sorts of stuff you could do to unlock this kind of thing for everyone. And you wouldn't ever have to phone that home back to the great Google in the sky. It wouldn't ever have to go back over some, encrypted, elliptic curve encrypted, end-to-end encrypted thing on some, device from a trillion-dollar company. Like, you could actually redo and restore the idea of personal computing, the idea of human computing and humane computing, and completely change the economic incentives. So I guess maybe the punchline here is I would love to see a world where what happened to open source, where it got hijacked and strip mined by traditional industrial era economics. I would love to see a world where that didn't happen to what AI could be. And this might be our last chance to actually solve this. So anyway, on that happy note, take questions. A little spicy.
I think I will assert current board president privilege and ask you the first question, and then I will go around here.
Sure. We can turn the lights on again too, so
yeah.
kind of get the.
Just kind of to set the tone, because I think it's a good place to start from where you said. So, how are we going to avoid a scenario where essentially the AI doomers, the Yukowskis of the world, and the self-interested lawmakers who will enable the doomers, how do we prevent them essentially locking all the potential of AI behind a giant corporate walled garden in the name of it's too dangerous to let ordinary people have this power? Oh, did I ask a tough one?
No, I'm trying to figure out how deep I want to get into it. So, here's what I really think. I really think we will have transhuman intelligence, suprahuman intelligence of some kind of a general reasoning capability within the next several years. It's pretty clear to me that's going to happen. And it will not be maybe the classic, what people now think of as AGI, Skynet, whatever kind of thing. But it's going to augment the intelligence of a human or a group of humans at some very, very large scale. It'll help them in reasoning and thinking and strategic planning. So let's call that AGI 0. And this is actually a long-winded way to answer your question, but I really want to give the right build for this, okay? So if we're on the brink of building AGI 0, now every single government with more than pocket change is trying to build that too. They just don't tell you about it. They don't argue with Yudkowsky. They're just going to build it, okay? And the first thing you do, think about this for a second, if you can build the God Oracle, what's the first question you do once you build it? Thinking from a national security perspective.
Encryption?
No. How do I immediately kill everyone else in the world that's trying to build one of these things? Or stop them? Or confuse them?
Basically, how do I be the only one with an A-bomb?
Yeah.
How can I make sure that I retain my advantage? It's just prisoner's dilemma. You got a box, you're in a cell, you get a box, you make one wish, right? This genie comes out, you get to make one wish, and there's a bunch of other people in other cells that don't like you, and that you don't like particularly very much. What's the first thing you're gonna do? Well, you're gonna hope that you're the first one to get that genie. You're gonna say, take all the boxes away from everyone else in every other cell, right? And maybe you get there, and maybe you don't. If you got the box, chances are you were the first one. Because anyone else gets the box, prisoner's dilemma, what they're going to do? They're going to make sure you don't get the box, right? So if I were running one of these dark projects and I was literally given a US level budget to build something like this, that would be the first thing I would do. I would say identify all the people in the world who are working on projects like this, figure out how to stymie their effort. Maybe not actually kill them, but just what does it take to slow all of them down so that they don't get to this level, to AGI 0 level. And then I'll do everything else after that, because then I've assured my lead. So I don't need to think about what the next steps look like, because I don't have an AGI. All I have is human thinking about humans in this world. And I'm going to tell you, the first thing that any 2-bit general is going to think about when they get this kind of thing is, how do I stop everyone else from getting it? Okay? That's just how monkeys think. So given that, now if you guys accept that argument roughly as true, what would be the first thing that you would do if you actually had this to play this through in the popular world? You would never say we achieved AGI. You would say, oh my God, we've just proven AGI is impossible. Or, oh man, progress has really plateaued on these things. These things are just not going to be you're going to do all these things to make it not look like there's been an abrupt stop, but you're going to try to shovel or shunt people into dead-end paths, honeypot, whatever kind of things. That's what you're going to do. And meanwhile, you're going to really get in there and make sure that everyone who could build one of these things has a car accident, right? That's really what you would do if you're America. So, and I'm not trying to celebrate this. I'm just trying to be realistic about what this actually will. Let's be really serious about this, right? Probably a serious question. So let's talk about Yudkowsky and the Doomers. You would absolutely have those guys go and fuzz the conversation. So that's what you would do.
Wow, if I didn't know better, just made a potential accusation at Yudkowsky there.
Not an accusation. I'm just trying to like gamecraft this thing. I mean, I think so. What I don't like is people who are playing this as if it was just a schoolyard game of checkers. This is not a schoolyard game of checkers. This is even if there's only 3 or 4 sovereignties in the world that can do this, which I don't think is true. These things are not that hard to build.
And that actually might be my natural follow-up to what you said is, okay, if assuming I'm this general and I'm not like dumb and ostensibly I got to be the general because I am really smart, this stuff is really easy to replicate and it's just going to get easier and easier over time. Like ordinary people, because of pre-trained models, ordinary people don't need a lot of computing power to access this stuff.
That's
I don't
right.
really actually see how you can kill everyone who might do it.
That's right. So that is the optimistic view on this, which is that because we're so lucky, this is almost a weak anthropocentric optimism. Because we're so lucky to live in a universe where the physics are such that we can use silicon circuits to replicate some sort of cognitive things that are similar to what we do in our brains. We're so lucky that these things are cheap, easy, we just plug them in, and they don't require some exotic unobtainium. It's just matrix multiplies. Oh yeah, that's pretty cool, actually. So given that you can't stop it, then what do you do? Right? Because if you could stop it, if it was required, I just saw Oppenheimer finally this weekend with my son, and they were talking about, well, the Soviets can't do it because they can't get the uranium. It's like, oh no, they got the uranium. If it was actually something where you needed this much uranium, or if it was like, oh well, Iran has all these centrifuges. Well, it'd be a shame if those centrifuges broke, right? Just break the centrifuges. But we don't have that with AI. You just need to be able to do matrix multiplies. You can do it on 3-year-old, crappy laptops, and it's fine. So we're maybe, everyone, if we just get them to recognize that this is not something you could stop, then they would sort of lean into, well, how do we make sure that the post-AGI world actually evolves in a way that doesn't lead to instant sort of collapse to fascism in every single country, right? And so that's an easier problem to solve than one power having the cognitive power of gods and everyone else being kind of held at arm's length,
We just have to solve that everybody's a little mini god.
Yeah. We're going to become better.
All right, with that, who else wants to ask a question? Yeah, you.
I've got several actually, but on the back of that question, it made me think, are there any lessons that can be drawn from how did that not happen with DARPANET becoming ARPANET, becoming us all in this room? How did that not happen to that chain of events, and is there anything we can draw from that in this?
How did what specifically not happen to it?
Well, there were moments where it easily could have not become the open internet, it easily could have not become open standards and DNS and all of us sitting in this room. It could have become top-down authoritarian command and control structures, and that could have been the end of it, and it could have taken 3 or 4 more decades before it became open, just by dint of ubiquity. I don't know, I was wondering if you think...
Well, it started pretty open, right?
Yeah, and then wasn't for, and then there wasn't.
And now it isn't. I mean, I would say we're not through it.
Yeah.
It isn't. Yeah. So I mean.
No, that's true.
Although to that end, it is interesting that originally, because of dialing into terminals to mainframes, with cloud computing, we're almost going back to that model in a weird way, sort of.
No, we are, and it's not bandwidth scarcity; it's economic control, right? And when I say these words, I just be clear. For me, it's all around the emergent. What happens when you incent a lot of people to do certain things? I don't think there's some shady dude pulling weird things behind a curtain. Because there cannot be. It's such a large emergent system. It's just that we've shaped the dynamics of it such that the emergent system locks in a certain kind of crappiness. Cory Doctorow probably would have talked about the enshittification. The enshittification is emergent, right? It's because we're shitty. And so you put a bunch of us together and we emerge shittiness. But and to not do that, we have to look to our better angels. We have to actually consistently fight and intelligently fight for the pieces of architecture, for the power moves that eliminate that. And so I think there's a, yeah, I mean, I don't know where I was going with that exactly, but I do think the internet actually ended up in a pretty dark and kind of crappy place. If you try to set up your own SMTP server, I mean, I don't want to rehash all these arguments in this room, but try to set up your own SMTP server and get reliable delivery to anybody at Gmail. Good luck. Call me back in 3 months, right?
The few people I know who do that get marked as spam all the dang time.
And that is not an accident in the sense that, back to this crap, if we'd actually solved, not with passport.net, but we've actually solved this problem in some robust way, and we had actually had that conversation in the concept of this articulation, so we can understand what scalable, what a spectrum of social identity actually meant, and what it meant to create humane spaces in a digital way where people could reveal as much or as little of themselves, then it wouldn't have been this polarized maximalist, no, it's all anons on 4chan, or no, everyone must have a biometric retinal scan to connect, to fucking ICMP or something, right? Those are not the answers. We have to be better people to become digital humans. And I guess maybe that's sort of the essence of all this, which I don't hear a lot of discussion around in general in these concepts. It's like, oh, we're just, fleshware, meat and bones, and wetware, and want to connect with this digital thing. And it's like, no, actually, for us to emerge collective wisdom in a digital way, we have to become better digital humans. And think about the synthesis of these things, which requires us to actually think very, very, in a very principled way about sociology and human socialization and individual psychology. And we didn't do any of that shit when we just went and stacked protocols together, right? So we end up with where we are. It's our own fault.
And I really just have to say that I really do like where you did finally emerge on privacy, because it actually is very close to what I sometimes articulate in a lot of my talks, where I basically say, like, privacy is what lets society fix the places literally in the social code we got it wrong. There's been a lot of mistakes throughout human history we only fixed because people could meet in private and say, you know what, I don't think this is right. And they could change those social norms without instantly getting slapped down and punished.
Yeah, it's a society that has the concept of privacy ultimately has humility about what is and is not within what a top-down kind of social thing can do. So anyway, that's
so yes, I really like where you converge on that. All right, we got some more questions. We got a whole room full of smart people. Yeah.
Peter, didn't you tell me you were in Cambridge recently for Air Sports Day?
Yes.
And what's...
No, I was not in Cambridge for it. I was on a golf resort, dialed into it. Okay. But it was not of my choosing. I went there because they gave me an award, so I had to go there. But
what are the lessons of Aaron Swartz to you? What kind of inspiration does he do for you?
Well, he got hounded by the feds for 1/1,000,000th of the infraction of any of these things. Makes me angry is what it does.
Makes, I think, most of us in this room pretty angry. And yeah, actually, I have never seen anybody contextualize his act compared to gathering this data. The articles he took from MIT, fraction of what they've stolen. Yeah.
On a principle basis, on a what he was trying to do basis, on an intent basis, on an outcome basis, on any kind of basis, making scientific literature available to the world, if that's a crime, then you have a bad society and you have a bad political system. Full stop. Full fucking stop. And then, 10 years later, to have this shit get rewarded with trillion-dollar valuations in the public markets is a world that really does not give a shit. And so people like the people in rooms like this have to just look at it with a cold, steely eye and say, okay, well, this guy is going to make more money than this whole room combined, president of Microsoft, and he's out there saying this shit with a straight face to a room that doesn't throw eggs at him and laugh him off the stage. I mean, he got a little bit of shit on Twitter, but whatever, everyone gets shit on Twitter. But this stuff, seriously though, right? Every single day you see somebody raising a bunch of money off of whatever model. I encourage you, go click through, look at the trading data. If any of them mention any of like Common Crawl, any of the other shit, it's a bunch of Fortran crap, it's a bunch of like other stuff, copyrighted stuff. It's a bunch of bad stuff in there. None of them are clean. Anyway, sorry, you triggered that, you asked me.
Well, I think, as I said, I think most of us feel pretty similar. And I'll also just say that anybody who wants to fight to keep the legacy of Aaron Swartz alive, and frankly, what's now also happened to Reddit just makes the whole situation even worse. But I'll say certainly the person who's at least carrying on the spirit of his protest at MIT, do anything you can to support the work of Alexandria Albakian, who just won an EFF Pioneer Award. With Sci-Hub, she's continuing his mission to make science free to the world. All right, we got some more questions. That was an incredible talk. We got to have more questions. There we go.
Are you familiar with Representative Realign from Silicon Valley?
So I have seen their work, but I don't know personally.
Well, he wrote a book called Dignity in a Digital Age: Making Tech Work for All of Us, and I think he's been thinking about this.
Okay,
stuff.
yeah.
Okay.
I
hope you get a chance to check him out.
All right, I will.
Let him know what you're working on. If you've got some
Okay.
ideas, I think.
No, I mean, he's in the extended network of people I know, but I've never interacted with him directly.
Okay.
But yeah, okay. I will make a note of that. Thank you.
I just got a chance to meet him at the Texas Tribune at the end of September. He was in town, and I was pretty impressed.
Great. No, so to be clear, I'm a dilettante in all matters, even coding. Like I, don't have much formal training. These are just ideas of mine that I just from my observation,
Yeah.
and I don't claim unique originality, whatever. I mean, the originality that I did come up with some of these ideas for myself, but not trying to claim like, oh my God, I'm the only person saying this at all. I'm just sort of, yeah, I would love to meet other people. If you guys have recommendations of things I should look at or people I should engage with, I'd love to get that. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Do you have any ideas about how to solve the economic alignment issue of 10 open source developers creating $10 billion in value and a bunch of private companies capturing that?
That's another talk. No, the topic of open source sustainability is something that has been, well, it's kind of fallen off a little bit. It's not the current thing anymore, but certainly for a number of years, it was talked about quite a bit, right? And the economic problem, I have had actually the good fortune in the last 6 months or so to do a lot more reading in some of the fundamental free market thinkers and some of these other kinds of folks. And what I've come to realize that it's not, you just won't win if you're in the wrong frame. And the problem is almost all of the economic thought we have in the world today is based on the interchange of scarce goods and resources. And there's a great book by, I forget the name, MIT Press, I think, Specialization in Trade. Right? All economics is rooted in specialization in trade. And when you have this, and you trade for the purposes of having comparative advantage and all this other kind of stuff. But with the unproperty, what do? There's not a lot of economic theory around this. The closest you get is actually, that's why I pointed this stuff earlier, like Eleanor Ostrom and the Commons, how do we express this kind of a thing? And there's no build in the current economic order to think about how we allot surplus, how do we allot these things when there's that much upside from collaboration. So you go from, like in physics, you talk about, we model quantum energy in a bounded, particle in a bounded infinite well. Well, what happens if there's no well? What if there's just like fucking energy could just flow everywhere and you get more of it the more it flowed? I don't know how you solve. There's no boundary constraints, right? So I'm not seeing a lot of thinking in this regard because most of the people who wrote about this crap were in the age of ox carts. They never had this idea that you got this incredibly powerful thing that the more you gave of it, the more valuable it got. So unfortunately, where you end up getting to, if you have to actually get a real practical answer, is you get to things like cooperatives. You get to things like meeting people's needs. How do we pull together our ability to go to market? Because these tools, you do have to still go to market with them. But the problem is there's no intrinsic way, given the software has already been expressed on this basis of property, and trademarks and copyright and all these things, it's really hard to keep it from escaping out, right? And keep it from getting strip mined. And so there's only so much you could do around that. But with AI, maybe a different thing is possible, right? That's kind of what I like to explore.
I wonder if, I love your emphasis on articulating positive vision in the form of a North Star as opposed to just constantly reacting to bad situations. And I wonder if you work with the idea of genius, Brian Eno's idea of scene scaled up. Genius people in a scene scaled up means something, you have an emergent level quality of work. So if you imagine what it's like during the High Middle Ages when there are universities around the year 1200, it's going to turn into the Renaissance. Some of those people knew it. So, you had a situation a few generations later where a person from outside of the elites, Leonardo da Vinci, if I remember correctly, was not from a wealthy family at all. I think his dad didn't marry his mother, but the system had enough genius to recognize that guy's individual genius. If it had been 200 years earlier, he might have just been a local artisan. So I'm just saying, have you worked with that idea of genius at all?
This is my first time hearing about it, but if I'm understanding the way you're describing it, I have expressed that concept myself when I was arguing for why, ages ago, the power of open source, and really the internet. It's really the internet, but once, even before we had GitHub, you still had mailing lists and websites and things like that where people could engage, and the people who actually moved the open source projects that are the core of SciPy and NumPy and things like that, people who moved those projects forward came from all sorts of backgrounds, right? And that was a really, even though I've been in the Linux community for a long time, and was a diligent /daughter, if that is a thing, and freshmeat.net and all these things, you didn't get a sense of it until you really were active in a community and you're on the mailing list and interacting with people and you're like, oh my God, this person is like a high school kid from like India and they have like great ideas. They're contributing to a very technical project. And if you do that enough times, you start realizing, man, we are very lucky that genius is just spread everywhere. And so if we really care about not losing those grains of genius, right, through our fingers, then we should be building systems that get all those people connected, give them the opportunity and the space and the right scenes to elevate their performance, to elevate and to do whatever. So I think that's the moral spirit at the heart of this, right? Yeah.
Amen. Preach it.
I was going to ask a different question about orthogonality, but when I heard the one from the back row, I just remembered that I thought I had heard a rumor that your talk was going to be about, like back in the summer, that it's going to be kind of about credit assignment or something.
Oh!
Because maybe like something, or alignment, credit assignment. I like the concept of logical depth. Like, hey, we have this thing that's like got a lot of computing and knowledge and things wrapped up into it, and somebody puts a thin layer on top and makes all the money, and nobody else got any.
Yes. So that is a little bit. Sorry. Let me.
Different talk.
Yeah. Let me pull that up. Just to give you this very.
Talk 2.0, ladies and gentlemen.
Well. Well, he called me out on having heard the rumor here, and it is one of these two. Let me see which one is. My idea around this was, so let me turn on this again, screen mirroring.
But you were very big on this in the spring when you and I met at that party.
Yes, but this is such a, it's a, hold on, did it? Oh my God. Enjoying Microsoft PowerPoint. No, not now. Literally not now. And so the idea here is that, oh my God, what just happened?
You haven't paid enough fealty to 365.
Yeah, I somehow ended up off of the thing here. And the idea here is, look, so if everyone can build LLMs and build AI models and build AI applications, my push at the time, and still is something that I'm trying to develop, is the idea that commercialization of LLMs will require solving the attribution problem. This is kind of the thing you're asking about. And it will not rest solely on the question, it will not be decided solely on the question of copyright versus fair use. And we'll need a holistic licensing model that actually credits both the data, the code, and the training efforts around this. And so I was proposing the idea of a new concept of a new license for AI. And license, this is a little controversial. Some people don't like the idea of using the license mechanism. But I think we have to start, for any kind of a new legal development, we sort of have to maybe back up and start with at least contract law and a permissions-based thing and signaling intent. My pitch at the time as well, and continues to be the point I make, is that there's many, many, many powerful people on both sides of the argument. The argument for fair use, and I can train off anything, and no, it's all owned by the existing copyright holders. So these people are basically locked in, heated battle, And they all know that this is going to be they're playing for all the marbles, right? Whoever wins this is going to get all the marbles. So entire industries, Hollywood, gaming, I mean, you name it. And so you also can't govern LLMs in a very simple way because they fit on a USB stick. So if we don't do anything, my argument was going to be that we end up with essentially some result like Authors Guild versus Google, where the big AI companies will negotiate bespoke licenses with the big copyright holders. Everyone else is in the legal gray zone where intellectual ventures, something can come around and just snipe you. But if you want to actually be an ML researcher, AI researcher, you almost for certain have to play within the Microsoft, Disney, Sony, blah, 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 whatever walled garden. That is a possible outcome. And then all the open source, all the various other kinds of things, they're just all in this legal gray zone. Yes, John?
Is that kind of like Napster leading into streaming services?
Yep, exactly. Yeah, it's exactly that concept. And the Napster leading into streaming services is kind of funny, right? Because the Spotify was one of the big, was the big lead of that, and it started from basically they were making uTorrent or whatever, and then they just got too big and too successful, and they're like, wait, let's negotiate a deal, since we're so good at distributing music, right? And so yeah, that's the point here, that we'll end up with essentially de facto licensing cartels, and everyone else outside of that gets arbitrarily sniped by whatever patent troll wants to go after them, or copyright troll. So this idea of a license, so let me stop this one and then go to this one that has a bit more of a build as to what that license looks like, which is here. Wait, where the heck is it? Sorry that this is such a mess, but just trying to respond in real time to an example of, this one. I think this is the one here. Nails. So here it is. Okay, so you see here? So the idea was to build something like a ML public license that has, like the Creative Commons, it's a set of, it's a license family that are compatible with each other, that kind of build up in different levels. And the key concept here is that we run ahead of settled legal jurisprudence or whatever, or any kind of settled case law. And what we do is we give authors and creators of any form, speech, text, whatever, video, we give them ways to assert their intent, to signal their preference of how their stuff gets used. And so essentially the same way that if you write an essay or a book, you would say copyright by, Joe Schmo 2023. You'd also say the use of the contents here. I assert that I'm the human author of the contents contained within, and the use of this content for training LLMs or whatever kind of deep learning models, ConvNets. We'll have some term in there. But the use of this for any kind of a deep learning, machine learning model is governed by the terms stated here. Nice little URL, short link, you click it, it takes you to the author's page with a lot of, basically it's like a registry clearinghouse, right? Almost like the way that ISBN or something would be. And it gives you the author's intent for that work. Now again, no legal teeth to it whatsoever, but if millions of authors and creatives do this, if Stephen Hawking does this, if Taylor Swift does this, then Grimes does this, you start doing this kind of thing, and you end up with something that is a groundswell grassroots movement that when the Copyright Office goes to issue their next statement on generative AI, they can't ignore that this many people have stated what they want to have done with this, right? They don't live in a world of ignorance anymore. And the really other interesting thing about this is that we would actually we take a line from the GPL and make this viral, right? So that anything that trains off of this data corpus, that LLM model itself must be licensed under a no less restrictive license than this level.
It has to be a copyleft license.
It's a copyleft sort of license, right? So you build this alternative third path with remuneration built in. A flexible system for this that's machine parsable, so you can build data cooperatives, data unions that assemble corpora. And so if you're a nonprofit researcher, you're like, give me the data I can use for training this kind of thing, and you can go grab all the stuff that's allowed for, that's like CC by SA NC or something, right? Non-commercial. And so this would be the concept, is to build essentially a viral, but not copyleft, but a viral structure that has remuneration built in, that expresses what creators want. And the really interesting thing about this as well is that let's say that you have text, or you have some, like, let's say I have a Jupyter notebook that tells people how to learn machine learning with Python. But in it, I may have code blocks that are generated by LLMs. Part of what this attribution, part of what this kind of information can do is also provide metadata to say which parts of the data set were actually human authorship and which actually were LLM generated, and even more, what versions of what LLMs generate those things. And this actually is a very useful thing for any AI developer, because then you avoid model cannibalism, where your LLM is trained on the outputs of some other LLM and you didn't know. It's like a dog eating another dog's poop, and all of a sudden your dog gets sick, right? So that's where another valuable thing of this is, that I can not only assert and attest human authorship, but also clearly delineate, demarcate, the provenance of the other LLMs that were used to generate this thing. So you can also build in some NFT stuff if you're NFT friendly and Web3 friendly and whatnot, but it's not an integral part of the story, but it's something you could do if you wanted a non-central banking fiat currency based way of doing this kind of thing in places that actually are difficult to bank, right? Because we want a global system of data registry, data management that doesn't exclude the remuneration possibilities for people living in countries that are not on the SWIFT, whatever I'm on system. And I think that, of course, because it's unlikely that any particular LLM researcher is going to negotiate the rights of 1 million different pieces of training content, what almost immediately emerge from this is the concept of data unions, data cooperatives, and places like the Internet Archive, places like Wikipedia will end up being clearinghouses for this kind of thing, and they will actually go and maybe put some, I don't know if affidavit's the right term, but they would put some attestation about the quality of particular corpus and corpora data releases, so on and so forth. I mean, you sort of see how all this is playing out. But the idea here is to build an alternative economic architecture, and this actually sort of answers the question from the gentleman in the back about how open source got strip mined. This would prevent the strip mining because it actually builds a way of building a composable economic system into it.
Do you see this eventually progressing to similar to how we now, web servers right now essentially have robots TXT to assert the web server's desires to a search engine crawler? Mm-hmm. Essentially websites will literally have similar metadata to a big data crawler of no, you may not scrape me for the model, basically, and eventually anybody who violates that there's now a legal case because they asserted their stuff and you didn't listen to it, basically. Or you can even build to the web server and request even.
That one is a little bit of a hairy issue because there are archival purposes where it's useful to scrape and things like that, and that's where the robots.txt thing is unfortunate, right?
You get organizations like Facebook trying to block academic research scraping, so it gets more complicated.
It gets more complicated. There's other builds on this, and not builds, but there's some other thinking around this that goes deeper. But this is the kind of the radical idea. And then you start with this, and so the really truly radical thing is if you say, well, what if I wasn't just licensing my essay or my book of poetry or my art? What if I literally just put this to my entire data exhaust? Every post on Twitter licensed with this thing. Every single Facebook post I post. Every single picture I take with my phone gets us watermark in the EXIF. Every biometric thing you read off of me from Apple Health. Every single piece of my digital wake is now actually part of this kind of a scheme. What you've now done is blown up the business models of trillion-dollar companies. Facebook's entire database digital twin version of all its users, those users would have an ability to assert their ownership of that model.
They could have just used all our pictures to train their model, which they did.
Which they did. Right? So this is the shit. I mean, if you really want to talk about the Molotov cocktail, or if you want to talk about the sort of the Guy Fawkes moment, this is what you would do, is you would push these kinds of data privacy, the digital likeness or the right of publicity kinds of things. You would go and create a grassroots viral movement around this kind of thing, and you're off to the races.
And then I think the real question is how then we get say creatives on board with that this is the answer, not just pushing to strengthen old broken copyright laws.
That's just a grassroots movement to basically catalyze the entire world of creative. I don't know. It's a non-linear sort of knock-on effect, right? It's chain reaction. Think about this though. Taylor Swift re-recorded her entire catalog because she didn't like the deal her record company cut. Right? It's a deeply non-linear effect that you could trigger.
Are there any legal minds that you know of that are like working on this, like how to operationalize?
Well, I've talked to some of them about this, and they seem to think that this basically, kind of holds water, and you just have to do it.
And I think, this ties into, I know a question I got, from the audience, that somebody was also just wondering, I think it ties into their question, was just sort of like, okay, so we have this positive vision, but yeah, like, what are the practical steps all of us who care about this in this space as activists can take to really push this vision? How do we get out of the current dystopia we are in with AI and seem to, like, the momentum is still with the open AIs and Microsofts and Metas and Googles of the world. Like, what is the actual path to getting us this beautiful AI empowers the individual future?
Well, I think I've done some thinking about this. And at the end of the day, money talks. Right? We still live in a system where power is either through the economic system or through kinetics. We don't want to go to the kinetic route generally. I don't think anyone here is empowered to win that at scale. But certainly the economic thing, given that ultimately the people that are pushing the larger centralized solutions, they're driven by economics as well. I don't think people are really hoping for dystopia at scale. They just think it'll be harmless for there to be another $1 trillion company around AI. And my thinking is that actually it could be quite harmful to have that kind of thing. And not just that, but we have the opportunity to give, this maybe gets back to like, to Nikola Tesla's idea of free energy for everyone. Like that would have been pretty cool. Like free cognition for everyone, that's pretty cool. And also a way for us to sort of restore our human dignity and sovereignty, that's pretty cool. So,
Questions? As far as the ownership of knowledge in perpetuity, I mean, is that the assumption that's being made here?
The ownership of knowledge in perpetuity?
Yeah, is that if they're arguing over who owns the information, do they own it forever? Is that, because like even patents and all are limited duration, so it's...
All default models include it. All default licensing models include a time-based expiration to the commons. Yep.
I'm approaching this from philosophy. I don't know enough about this topic to provide any solutions, to say the least. But sometimes you can expose a couple of contexts in order to outline some context. So in the case of privacy, the term that goes with privacy is exposure. The whole concern about privacy is to avoid exposure. The other fun factor on tell has to do with Eleanor Oster, who dealt with the tragedy of the commons source. What she did was dealt with a lot of small groups that were highly dependent on one another and had a sense of shame with respect to one another.
Yep.
In those particular communities, they did not have a problem with the tragedy of the commons.
Right.
Elsewise, they did.
Yeah. So the two responses to those two different separate things, you said, I think, I want to make sure I get this right, that around privacy, the point of privacy is to avoid exposure.
Yes.
Right? And I would say that that's almost what I'm saying, but not quite, that it's actually to give individuals control over how much they want to expose themselves.
Sure, that's
Right.
That's it.
But that's not just to avoid exposure. That again, see, if we just say that it's to avoid exposure, it's like you got to hide your weed in it. It's like, no, it's not about hiding anything. It's I get to say how I want to show up. I teleport into this place. I get to show up wearing whatever, however I want to be seen by people, right? So it's that agency in a social context. And so I'm not really disagreeing. I'm just sort of saying, the little clarification on that. The second thing relative to the tragedy of the commons and how small groups that had social governance mechanisms, let's say, like shame, things like that, they didn't have a tragedy of the commons, right? That was Ostrom's observation. And the reason that they don't in those situations is they actually have to break down how does that shame mechanism work? What does it mean to be a small group? You have large groups actually which don't have tragedy of the commons. What you need is for people to have persistent identity, to care about their social identity in the context of that socialization, to be able to, every person, there has to be a causal link. If this person pees in the pool, all of us have to swim in somebody's pee. Like, you have to be able to trace the causality. So if you're in an environment where the consequence of actions are too far in the future or too muddied to be able to disentangle and say that person did that bad thing, therefore bad on them, then you don't have that. you don't have that mechanism, right? That corrective mechanism, the shame mechanism. And if you don't have the ability to remember even who was here, like you don't have identity and persistent social identity, then you have a utter defector problem, right? People come in, they'll do something bad, they'll leave, they'll take the money and they're gone. And so, in all these, when we say small groups, shame is a governor against the tragedy of the commons. The reason is because all these different, you have to break down what is meant by small. And right, and the way I think about it as a physicist is what are the components, what are the traits, what are the core principles that cause people to not have to have external things, but actually within the context of that socialization have self-governance. And so that's kind of how I break that down into pieces.
We have a little more time for questions.
Is symmetric orthogonalization closure for open asymmetrical information warfare?
Yeah, you'd have to explain that to me a little bit more.
There's a concept, a theory of asymmetric information, that the sellers have more information and is valuable. And I'm using the words open and closed system and asymmetric warfare in the militarization with information warfare. So I'm seeing a attention dilation with memory for the privacy aspect of having a exposure, and with the womb being attuned without a view. That's why I'm asking, is symmetric orthogonization closure for open asymmetrical information warfare?
And I think I would, so my answer to that would go to, can we start with the privacy and identity thing? The only, I think it's pretty well, it's pretty well established that the way you solve the prisoner's dilemma is through iteration, right? And you do incremental sort of iterated prisoner's dilemma. And so what happens with each iteration of the prisoner's dilemma in an iterated prisoner's dilemma thing is that each prisoner is building a social model of the other prisoner. You know, and we're all doing this. Like humans are the apex predators on this planet. Every single one of us, if we were actually psychopathic murderers, any one of us could do a lot of harm to everyone in the room. Right? Every single millisecond that one of you does not whip out an axe and start cutting people is an instance of iterated prisoner's dilemma playing out in this room, that we all can trust that we're not murderous psychopaths, right? So in every situation, when you have asymmetric information, right, and like that, you have to be able to strip away enough of the privacy, or you have to give enough of yourself to show what you're going to do under this circumstance. You're essentially showing, you're putting social proof on the table that you're not a defector. At the end of the day, that's all you can really do. Anything that we put in through technology to remove the ability for us to retain memory about who we're dealing with is then an attack, an erosion on that fundamental mechanism for a good market for a social exchange, right? Maybe a way to think about that. So I don't know if that actually answers your question, but I think that's my response to your question. I don't know if that really answered it, but.
Thank you. I'm trying to get with the concepts of your orthogonality, and that's where the symmetry. The
orthogonality there is generally defense against capture, right? And to be very clear about what I mean with capture here, to put this into concrete terms. So, like we'll just take this iPhone, right? Gosh, it's just the worst example of all of them. It basically collapses all of these things. And so for me, like if I communicate with, I guess it's hard to sort of, like if I had a separate device that I could encrypt my data on, and I copy the encrypted bits to my transmittal device, then it doesn't matter who I use as my ISP or my transfer agent, they can't really read what's in there, and they can't therefore own or leverage even as a monopoly on that, they can't leverage that into, oh, you know what, the bit rate for the data that's this website is different than the bit rate for the data for this website. Or you just won't be able to go to those websites or stream these video services, right? The idea of common carriage is essentially an attempt to create some orthogonality between the bits versus the content, right? The carriage of bits versus the content. But that's entirely a commercial concept. It's driven by commerce and by economic concerns. and antitrust concerns. This is really more along, it's like what kind of engineering or software architecture, really, I guess, tech architecture, ensures this in a fundamental way. And we didn't get here with TCP/IP, we didn't get here with web servers, we didn't get here with the current internet stack, which is why things are collapsed and why like a Verizon, one example I give of this is the Verizon Super Cookie. You guys remember that, the Verizon Super Cookie? Where they were secretly putting a x-whatever cookie in every single web request, or header in the web request, that was a unique ID tied to that Verizon subscriber. You guys didn't hear about that shit? That's awesome shit. That was some awesome shit. And that's what happens when your data protocols, which is the website content, the HTML, is injectable. It's not SSL encrypted. It's injectable by your transport agent, right? That's just a small example.
And I think, you originally brought those slides up in the context of that just decentralization in and of itself is not a cure-all, right? Well, so for instance, mind you, I'm boosting, Mastodon and Lemmy, I'm singing their virtues, but the truth is, in and of themselves, they may not solve the issues of a Twitter and a centralized social media. With bad content moderation, you could have something exactly like what happened with email, where it's like, in theory, you can have endless email servers. They're all run by a few companies, a lot of them Google, and they mark anybody running their own as spam. If it eventually turns into there's just 5 Mastodon servers, and they mark all the tiny ones, they block and defederate from them, same problem.
The same problem. Yeah.
Are you optimistic about homomorphic encryption for means of preserving privacy? For instance, there's a huge penalty you take. You take like a 4 order of magnitude computational penalty right now. But it does allow you to do some things like run private data through proprietary models.
Yeah. I think it could be the baseline for some interesting technologies that would be more orthogonal like this. The problem is if you were to put that capability and build it into the framework, if Tim Cook was just the most golden-hearted person in the world and declared, Apple, to their credit, has tried to do a lot of these kinds of things to some extent, but if we were to actually put that on here, but the social pressure around all the teenage girls with iPhones was to take pictures and take nudes of themselves, it doesn't matter, right?
I guess I'm talking more like kind of outside of, if we're to a thing where these transport and identity and stuff are more decoupled. I mean,
right.
Going into a more optimistic.
It could, absolutely. That could help. But I really mean that. I don't mean that in a dismissive way. I mean, I really do think homomorphic encryption could be a good thing. I think that somehow if we could separate the transport of data from, like, right now people think of the internet as a topology. It literally is a series of tubes, and we got to be jacked into the tubes. And I don't even know what it would quite take to get people out of that mentality about being connected to the thought space, the new sphere of humanity. If we could change that paradigm, the tech we have already right now is good enough to do that, right? And so that moving from constantly connected, from when the cable modems first started rolling out across America back in the late 90s, if we can get people off that paradigm of I need to connect to this web server, give them all my shit, let this JavaScript scrape all my mouse cursor movements. If we get people out of that mentality, that would be we'd have to create new kinds of computer devices, interfaces, and we'd have to basically create new ways and ways of thinking about computing and what computers do for us that then don't put humans being the connected thing. And that's my positive vision for what AI could do for us, is that we could have smaller, dumber agents that have some sense of who we are and what we want and our preferences, but they then negotiate with others, and then their interaction with the constant connected thing is not revealing anything about who we are, and so on and so forth. And that moving to us being the center of a bunch of agents that then defend our privacy, that would be the architecture that would then allow humans to sever themselves from what the constantly connected, plugged in, jacked in internet does to human socialization.
So basically a little drone sphere of angels hovering around you.
Absolutely. Rendering you invisible and unknowable to the panopticon, right? I mean, this is what in Diamond Age, right? They were walking around with little nanobot swarms to kind of protect them from various things. Maybe it's that.
Yeah.
I have a question which is actually probably beyond your presentation today, but I'm just curious your opinion on this. So what we are experiencing these days is like this revolution that AI is going through, is that there's an ocean of data out there that human civilization aggregated or accumulated. And we have an extremely efficient method now to extract information from the ocean of data and compress it, integrate it in a very clever way. However, this knowledge that AI generates today is going to be part of that ocean. It's going to be recycled, right? So if the next generation of AI will use this as data. So in a way, we are recycling information. So will we ever exhaust the resources of information in this way? And I assume we would, unless there's guarantee that there's new information coming in, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's actually, I think that's science probably that brings new information or exploration, human exploration. But it's a kind of very narrow source, right? So I see, I see AI as being a lot more aggressive and aggressive in a way to recycle the information that we have than these new sources of information that we can utilize. I don't know, and I may not make much sense, but
no, it makes total sense. The question makes total sense. And there's a term that people use for this general phenomena of right now, LLMs are generally trained on large corpora of data, and they are all terrified of this, what they call model cannibalism problem, like I described earlier. Now, there's some sites that expressly forbid people from posting LLM-generated content as responses or whatever, but they never know, right? And so, absolutely, there's a fair trade in the world of people diving these like wrecks and getting steel from ships that were sunk before like the first atom bomb, because they don't have certain radioisotopes, they don't have certain, and they use them in manufacture of specific medical devices or sensitive instruments that they don't want them sending off any kind of radiation, right? So the pre-2002 text corpus, or actually maybe whenever GPTs really started becoming popular, I mean, obviously it's gone on a hockey stick, but even prior to ChatGPT, the machine-generated content was a problem. GANs and other things were creating content, and they were trying to optimize SEO things for Google scrapers. So this has been a problem people talk about for a while, model cannibalism. Now the problem is it's going to really explode, right? So I have lots of responses to what you said, and they're not going to be in any particular order, but I'll just kind of throw it all out at you and hopefully make something of it. On the topic of this model cannibalism, several things are also happening at the same time. People are trying to figure out new architectures, not even transformer architectures, but new architectures for doing what transformers do with embeddings. And those may allow for this current level of generative AI performance without having to consume so much. So the ingest funnel is not so wide, so big. You can actually do a lot with less. And that would allow you to avoid some of this cannibalism problem, because you just don't need to suck everything in, right? That's one concept of the thing that's there. Another comment I'll make is that for things like art and whatnot, as long as humans have some creativity, they're going to bring the human creative element into making this art thing do whatever. It'll be contextualized based on whatever music was popular, or whatever event just happened, or whatever thing, right? And so on and so forth. But when it comes to information and sciences, and we'll discover anything new, or will we just stuck as like the machine regurgitating itself and recycling, right? All these things. My answer to that is actually something much more deeply philosophical. And again, going back to John Perry Barlow, where he says that, and this is based on Greg Bates and stuff, that information is a verb. So we talk about data as a static thing, information as a static thing, knowledge as a static thing. Again, it's almost like looking at software as a static thing. And we ignore the brain that's doing the informationing, the group of people that are doing the discovering. So I think the way I look at it is looking at humans getting smarter, humans exploring, humans intuiting as a process. And so the question is, can that process get smarter and better? Or will it ever be limited because we can't think beyond just what the machine that helps us, is doing? And that, I don't. So I view it from that perspective, right? This is an assistant to help us think better, explore, research, and so I'm not as worried about the wake, the exhaust of static artifacts that might be left in the wake. So I don't know if this is maybe too philosophical of an answer or response to that, but that's kind of how I think about it. So I'm not as worried about that part of it, because I think of, you could really absolutely see a future where very much like, just going to all the science fiction shit, I guess, whether it's a bunch of Cylons like now plugged in or we're just Borgs or whatever, but you can see humans entering into fugue states with these kinds of things and being able to sort of form almost a hive mind exploring whatever kind of things. And there may be a lot of time and room left for human intuition, human embodied experience in the world to reflect into that well before those things transcend into beyond transhuman levels of sensory experience and intuition. So I'm not saying it will never happen, but I'm just saying I'm not worried really about the data cannibalism or the model cannibalism in any kind of short time in the near future.
We're nearly into time. Do we got any one or two final questions for Peter? It's fine if we don't. We've certainly chewed on a lot already.
Well, my other question is just, when you sort of came into this orthogonality concept, did you go down the rabbit hole and think about how it applies to, I don't know, politics, economics, biology? Did you find anybody that was thinking about it in those domains?
I was really just nerding out on DWeb and internet architecture. This actually came out of, what was it? Well, I can't search for lightning talk because I give a lot of those things. I gave here it is. So this is the one where I really, this is actually from December 2016, whenever it was, and January 2017, and I was giving a talk about, I was invited to give a lightning talk at this unconference that happened at the Institute for the Future. And so part of it, everyone's like, wait, what just happened? The Trump thing and all this and truth and all these things. Anyway, so I did give a two-part sort of 1-2. And the second part was this humane network concept. And this is where I really started developing these ideas and go down kind of a rat hole on all this stuff. And so this is where, this is where this kind of stuff comes in, and this like pile of fail, problems at every level, other failures, all these things. And fundamentally, so you sort of see some of this articulation come out. This was before I joined the CHT board, before I really started working and talking to like Tristan Harris and Asa, before I wrote up some of my things and thinking about this. This is before I invested in what became Beaker browser, which then became Blue Sky. This is, prior to all of this, sort of the seminal moment as I was trying to understand what really happened here, right, in creating kind of the outcomes. And so this is where I define my thought about what a humane network looks like, that actually it's against the end-to-end nature of the internet. It goes the other way. That in a humane network, the trust is a scarce resource, and in a humane network, a trusted connection is actually the signal. It is not actually common carriage. It's the exact opposite of that, in fact. So anyway, so this is where all this stuff came in. And thinking more on this, a couple years later, kind of is where I hit upon the expression of orthogonality as a way to preserve and ensure that some of this stuff actually connects. So
I may actually take privilege of final question, because you were talking about the orthogonality, actually kind of had me think about saying, so like, I think that's a very intriguing idea of like, orthogonality is a way to break these systems apart and make them more robust and get out of this purely topological way of thinking. I can't help but notice, though, that orthogonality in higher multidimensional space is literally at the core of machine learning. Has there been, I have not stumbled across this, I'm sure not the first person to think of this, but like, have you thought maybe about like using the machine learning models to not just find the weights, but actually figure out what the optimal parameters are, what the orthogonality itself should be? for anything, but for
Well, I mean, hyperparameter optimization is a whole topic. It's a rich topic, right?
Okay, I don't hear it talked about very much, but as I said, I knew I couldn't be the first person.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's a thing, but in higher dimensional space, this is the thing about higher dimensional spaces and vector spaces is that in higher dimensions, almost all vectors are orthogonal, right?
True.
Pretty much, because it's a lot of dimensions, right?
Just pure probability they're going to be orthogonal.
Yeah, right. There's a lot of counterintuitive things about higher spaces. Volumes exceeding area, like what is this? Surface area exceeding. No, there's a really cool video of who was it that did this, where they showed the intuitions about spheres and lines, intersections, all these things completely just fall apart because you can define n sphere in n-dimensional space, and it doesn't do what you think it does. Like it's just really, really weird. So we don't have an intuition on that. We barely can intuit 4D space. We talk about 100 billion parameter space. We have no idea.
But I guess you had to focus the question just sort of like, is there maybe the potential to apply these machine learning techniques to sort of figure out what the orthogonal parts of our computer architecture should be, like where we should be separating these pieces. Like I think your 3-part division is a pretty good place to start, but it kind of gets me thinking like, well, we've been hung up on these topologies and we keep chasing the same decentralization dream that doesn't work out. Is there like a fundamentally different way of breaking apart the architecture that we could literally throw these models on?
It is possible. It is absolutely possible we can use ML techniques and AI techniques to help us architect better things like this. But you still then have the problem how you move from here to there, right? You don't start with nothing.
Right. Well, you still need data as well.
Say what?
You still need data as well.
Yep. I don't think it's rocket science thing about what we should do to establish this kind of stuff. It's just nobody wants to do it because everyone's making trillions of dollars. Everyone's 401ks is on the blue chip companies that does do this. So we're just like, whatever. So yeah, I think the hard part is how you move out of one loop that works really well and do a discontinuous nonlinear leap to something vastly better. We have a moment in time where we could have that kind of a change, and the only way we leap to that future versus an incremental shitty future is people have to actually go and create that alternative. Yeah.
Well, get on it, everybody.
All right, get on it. Yeah.
All right, and with that, I want to thank Peter for an incredible talk.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time.
Stick around. We're probably going to go hang out in the lobby bar, have some drinks and chats. So yeah, we hope to see you, and if not, we'll see you next year. But thank you all.
How do we get the card?
You can go, Emily, yes, if she's here, she'll be able to get you them. And you need to be out by 10 if you want the discount, otherwise, no way.
That's the word of the month right now.
Oh my God.
Oh, shit. That's all you gotta know, man. That is all you gotta know.
Oh man. Well, so
Anybody else need a
thanks. That was
parking
great.
pass? I got a few.
Thank you.
if need one.
You want to do a podcast with us sometime?
Sure.
Sure, I'll send you a note about it.
Sure, yeah. Let's do that. New Year.
Hey, Peter, you gonna be able to join us for a drink? You gotta
I
get going.
unfortunately have to get going. I have not seen my kids all day.
I totally hear you about kiddos.
I gotta go do
Yeah.
some work, it turns out.
Yeah, and well, really, thank you so much. Quite incredible
Welcome.
talk, and it's
thanks.
really,
Hope everyone enjoys all the philosophizing.
Well, frankly, I'm looking at, to be blunt, I'm looking at a lot of the people eating up the AI philosopher oxygen, and I really wish you were a more prominent voice even than you are, because I heard a lot less idiocy coming from you and a lot more real actionable ideas.
Unfortunately, I have to get going home, but I appreciate all the each other.
Yeah.